income trap simply means that we have had growth to sustain but have not had enough to overcome and to move on to the next level, to be in par with developed countries. Despite the efforts, this is a development stage that characterizes countries that are squeezed between being low-wage producers and highly skilled, fast-moving innovators. Malaysia, in the global economy, how does government manage the middle income trap while being competitive? Controls your money. Malaysia is in a trap, and we see how we're dealing with this while we try to be competitive. And today, to discuss on this topic, we have two guests joining us today at the studio, and we have Associate Professor Dr. Andrew Kabjai from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and we also have joining us today Dato Praba Thiagarajah from Basis Bay Group. Dr. Andrew, can you just explain very briefly what does it mean to be in the middle income trap?
Well, if we look at the originators or the researchers who actually coined this term middle income trap,
right?
Gil and Karas from World Bank, it is actually a issue about policy mismatch.
Right.
Okay, where countries fail to match their growth strategies with prevailing structure of their economic characteristics.
Interesting.
So, for example, I would say that middle-income countries trying to sustain labor-intensive manufacturing or export-led growth, despite the competitive advantage caused by higher wages. In other words, they are trying to move into high income, but they are still doing low wage.
They're getting there, but they're still maintaining what they were doing before.
Yes, exactly. So there is a mismatch over there. That's the first thing.
Okay.
And second, the definition coming from them is actually country trying to leapfrog.
Right.
In other words, they're trying to jump.
Also, if they have enough to sustain the growth.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Trying to jump or trying to move too fast. You know the term, you have to crawl before you learn to walk and run. Exactly. Yeah, so that is actually what is being reflected. So countries are trying to leapfrog into the technology frontier without having the, fundamentals in place. Skilled workers and so forth.
Dato Praba, how would you add on to that?
So I would say that I think the definition itself is given by per capita income today. So on average, the World Bank and others tend to give a threshold for about 4,000 odd US dollars, at least in 2012, to about 12,000 US dollars per capita income as a middle income group. Now, they take nations as a whole and put them and lump them into this space. Now, there are different papers that talk about all of this, and they have different definitions for them. But I think essentially what people are trying to say is, how long are you stuck in this space? And I think there are timelines given. If you're 14 years in this space, 28,
yes.
That's right, 14 and 28. But these are definitions provided by policymakers in certain places, but not necessarily something that's cast in stone.
Right.
Essentially, I think nations just want to get away from being too long or just stuck in a per capita income in a certain group. But we've got to go a bit deeper into that and figure out which sector of the economy and who's stuck and who's not stuck, because you could have those issues as well. So essentially, it's a bit of a complex conversation, but very simply put, it is the need to get away from being stuck in an income zone per capita.
So definitely one solution won't work because you're dealing with diverse issues.
A solution definitely won't work.
One solution definitely won't work.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Andrew, could it be the reason because we don't have enough talent to sustain this, and is it because we don't have a technology to support that?
I would say that I wouldn't say that we do not have talent. I mean, come on.
Yes,
we do have,
it's very hard to believe that we don't, right?
Yeah, we do, okay, but we have a huge problem in terms of brain drain.
Right.
Second, as the document by World Bank, okay, the recent one, okay, it says that perhaps we do not have enough high-paying jobs.
Right.
One of their prescription is creating jobs according to the World Bank document. So we need to have that as well, and we have to look into what is the future of work. not just about the skills of the worker. Of course, it is important, the skills.
True.
But, workplace, work-life practices.
Whether the whole package can be put into place.
Exactly.
Understood.
So it's the, how do you say, talent is there, how to retain them, question mark. And then creating technology. I think this one, Dato,
so there must be a match. So.
Yeah, this is your area. For me, my understanding of creating technology is we do not have our own homegrown indigenous technology. That is the problem. Yeah.
That was my...
Yeah, having that, without that, our exports, we will not match what is being described. You have not much export sophistication, you don't have much technology content for exports, and that will have a ripple effect in terms of, whether our value creation in the global value chain. I think I spoke too much. Dato, I think this is your area.
So we have a vision, but we are still not ready to get there.
Yeah.
No, I think there is no real vision.
There is no
real
still
vision.
very vague
There was this Dr. M's 2020, which all of us bought into to some degree. I think that's a fallacy of sorts.
Right.
There are many different structural issues that are not in place. But if you get to the core of what's wrong, there are many. We could address the structural issues. But if you talked about innovation and do we have our own capabilities, I think if you ask me as a Malaysian homegrown entrepreneur who is now in... we've been in 20 over countries for a good period of time now, and I established my first office outside Malaysia in the late 90s, in the year 2000. So I see the changes in Hong Kong as China came in. I was there in Hong Kong.
You have a wider outsider look as well.
So I've had an outsider look from Thailand, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia from now well over 2 decades, right? And I can share with you that the progress that China made is amazing, and we all know why. That's purely manufacturing led, right? But if you take... challenges that we have as a nation, there is a fundamental core issue. While China wasn't very innovative in its early years, it was hardcore manufacturing. It moved away from that, and it's trying to move away from that now, very badly, but it's got a lot of capital. The world has created, that history and that understanding is very well known, but that's a billion over people manufacturing at low cost, and all of a sudden their cost of manufacturing is very high. So it's a no-brainer that if we tend to follow an agricultural journey, get stuck in a manufacturing journey, and then try to get into high value, I think we're going to miss the plot. You don't need to jump. You don't need to go through these steps in what is the norm in Southeast Asia. So what I see, and it's frustrating for me, is the inability to appreciate DDIs, domestic direct investments, versus FDIs, which are foreign direct investments. We just get so caught up in that, which is it just flies. It comes and it can go. Very little loyalty to the country because it's not necessarily their domicile or place at which they want to expand their technology.
We will be taking a very short break, and when we come back, we will dive a little deeper into that. Please stay with us on Who Controls Your Money? Thank you for staying with us on Who Controls Your Money. Dato Praba, you were just adding on as to why we are here and whether if we have enough sustainability. Can you just add on to that point, please?
So I think we're here for a variety of reasons. So if I'll just share my own personal experience, right? I left University Malaya, worked as an engineer in the semiconductor industry, a quality control engineer for about just under a year. Probably the easiest job I've had in my life. Just quality controlling somebody else's process or design, right? I moved on to IBM, supporting machines that they created and supported them technically by being a field customer engineer, if you like. Now, I left them and started trading these computers and then started getting into the services segment of my own and created value by building our own capabilities and eventually built data centers and host and provide functions and have competed with IBM, HP, Sun, if you like, at that time. And also today, we take NTT head on, Amazon head on. Now, that's a path which I'm saying can be done by others. And I think that's the missing piece. So the DDI capability, the thinking that we can leapfrog this and not necessarily step into manufacturing, play and stay there for long. I'm not against FDIs, for sure we need them, but we've got to make sure that they have some stickiness in terms of transfer of knowledge, which, as you rightfully pointed, is not going to come because I think one of the nicest places where we have R&D today from memory is what goes on in Penang with Intel.
Right.
But otherwise, they're not transferring even the core design capabilities. The countries are going to keep this. They're going to protect them. But not only are the companies going to do that, the countries are going to help their nations protect what they have.
Yes, because ideally that would mean a bit of a head start, right, when it comes to growth.
So the country needs it, but you see, if the business is left to their own device, the first element is, let's take a simple example today. If you take a pen now and it's said made in Japan, you have a value idea. You say if it's made in Switzerland, immediately goes up a notch.
Yes.
And if you say Malaysia, where are you going to put it? So almost immediately the idea that Malaysian capabilities are not there is ingrained with us. And this comes to the core of how we are working as a nation, as a country. The idea of productivity, we are subservient. This whole colonization has not brought up thinking, and that's what we need.
To break away from
We have to break from that whole
because
colonization
we're still
of the
under
past.
that. Right.
So the Indian boys have gone. They've taken flight, and the Chinese now have said, enough, I'm taking you on, head on. But we Malaysians are sitting around being Chinese and Indians ourselves, have no idea what the hell's going on. And we're going to be colonized by these guys in different ways, in time. Just give it time.
Sure.
We'll be sending mates to Indonesia soon.
Okay. Dr. Andrew.
That has been in the field for so many years.
Yes.
So there must be truth in there.
Definitely. But I just want to hear your part of it.
I'll go on the overall theoretical side.
Right.
Usually when we talk about technology transfer, there are actually two types. One is what we call the vertical technology transfer, meaning that transfer within the company, like the perception that, if you let's say you engage an MNC, the MNC will transfer technology to you because you're the supplier.
Right.
That is what we call the vertical transfer. And vertical transfer, like you say...
So there's like a proper vertical hierarchy to follow. It goes like step by step.
Just imagine that, it's like this.
Like a pyramid. So it just depends on how high.
A vertical and a horizontal plane.
Right.
Vertical plane is within the, let's say, manufacturing or the factory.
Okay,
let's say.
got it.
Okay, transfer of... Don't always have to be technology, maybe perhaps managerial skills and all these things. And then there's another dimension, what we call the horizontal transfer, meaning that it is beyond the company. And this is what, studies have shown. It is called the demonstration effect.
Right.
Where MNCs come in and they demonstrate, let's say, best practices. Okay? And maybe the companies who are not within that value chain may learn from them. Okay? And another way of what we call the horizontal transfer is, employees who actually work in the MNC come out and start their own companies.
Okay, so they gain the knowledge, experience, and then they go branch out on their own.
So the technology transfer can be either vertical, the direct transfer, or the horizontal one,
Right.
Then we have seen those actually in Penang,
Right.
Those who are ex-workers of Intel actually come out and actually become their own entrepreneurs. So if you look into it, the technology transfer part, we can actually look in these two dimensions, in my opinion.
So I guess to say that, we don't have the knowledge or brain power to back it up would be a little untrue because we see people doing it even on a smaller scale.
Yes,
why can't we do it on a larger scale?
Yeah, so that's why I would say that, maybe perhaps if we say that there's no transfer, I wouldn't say there's no transfer. It's just the mode
unrecorded ones, I guess.
Either it is the mode of transfer, whether it is vertical or whether it is horizontal.
Okay. That would be the defining factor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's the degree, though. So I'd say it's the degree, right? So I've had this conversation before with many people who support FDIs against organizations like us, who are FDIs ourselves when we go to different countries outside of Malaysia.
Yes.
It's really sad if our own nation doesn't see our innovation, and I've actually gone through that. So while we've competed against large multinationals, we've been in the receiving end of competing against the likes, and I might as well tell you, people like NTT, who are in our backyard in our data center world, competing for the same market, and we're still the same customer pool in Malaysia. So large premier banks in Malaysia, we were in the last phase competing with NTT, but NTT themselves were subsidized. I'm just using one case study, right? But there are several examples like this. So that base is big. Now, obviously, across the industry, the belief that we want to be innovative, so we leapfrog these baby steps that, because I've always had this, right? Because I had 1 year stint in NEC as a semiconductor engineer and a year stint in IBM, there's no two ways about it. You do learn by being exposed to multinationals anywhere, but there are many ways to learn this. But if you wish to innovate and be above all of this, you've really got to leapfrog the idea that you want to follow this journey and allow them to lead the tracks. How do you create innovation? Innovation comes from which place? Does it all come from Silicon Valley? Is that where it's supposed to come from for the future?
No.
Now, is it going to transfer to Bangalore?
There is many other spots to come from.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we're going to miss this now if we don't have an innovative idea or thinking to challenge the average. How do we do that? So I think that's the frustration that I've endured competing against multinationals globally and regionally. Having a fair amount of success there, but understanding from a Malaysian context, the belief that we can compete. You see, even if you did the baby steps which Associate Prof just spoke about, you've got to be mindful, those are baby steps.
Yes.
Are you interested in baby steps? Are you interested in quantum leaps?
The bigger
so where
ones.
you want to go with this? Now, do you want to be subservient? Now, keep an idea as well. Keep this in mind, yeah? There's no way Facebook, if Zuckerberg was in University of Malaya or UKM or whichever local university, there's no Facebook. It doesn't exist. So you can take the same individual and put him in a different place. And if you're attempting to copycat that and not innovate your own strategy, you'll never kick that off. No amount of ideas are going to make that work. So it's the same in the technology industry as it applies perhaps in the manufacturing. If you're subservient to Intel, you're supporting Intel. But if you're able to get out of that and do something regionally, globally, and compete against a bigger space, it's a different game completely. And that thinking is what we have to build on.
Okay.
And the ecosystem, I think, the ecosystem is important to actually support all this leapfrogging and all this.
So that's a very good point. So the ecosystem, you need to identify what type of ecosystem, right? So like when Proton was created, it had a bunch of people who actually supported Proton. Were they supplying steerings for Ferrari, Porsche? So then you got to think again. So if there is an ecosystem, what ecosystem are you after? Now you can support something that goes after the Protons or the Kanchils of the world, but you stay there.
Okay.
You can buy Lotus, but you can never get out of that mindset. Our brain drains are leaving the country. There's no two ways about it. The Singaporean guys at key positions remain Malaysians, many of them. How did that happen, right? And so all these little brain drains have been going on for years. So our talent pool is there, but our ability now to pick up that talent and create a combustion here that is going to play globally hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And at the core of it, we've got to get to that point.
Right.
What are the structural issues that are at play?
If this is as simple as what it is, I'm sure it is, what are the policymakers or the government actually doing to address this issue?
I'll go first.
I've got a lot of opinions on this. So
Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
Okay.
I'd like to hear yours.
Just imagine this as a game of, I don't know, badminton. Okay.
Okay.
First thing first, before you can play the game, you must have the badminton court and you must have the racket. So physical investment is very important.
Right.
Yes, that is one point. So after you have the court, you have the best racket and everything, you need to train the players, right? The players have to be fit enough to play the game. So that is where human capital comes in, okay? So government will focus on physical investment and human capital, but that is not enough, right? Because you need the players who is fit enough to now play the game.
Okay.
So that is where market competitiveness and strategies on the market comes in. Okay. So if you take the badminton game and switch it to, let's say, I don't know, investment in ICT perhaps, okay, so we need to have the infrastructure in place. Okay, for example, now with the ICT era, okay, e-commerce, everything, all these broadbands and all these connectivity has to be in place. So those are the physical investments. So government have to make sure that they are in place in order to harness the people with talent.
Right.
So those
elements will come into very serious, important place if you want to move forward.
Yes, exactly. So if you imagine that whole thing as a game of sports and you superimpose them into any industry, it works that way actually. So human capital investment is very important. Government has been doing it for many years. And also the market intelligence part, which is a bit, what Dato say, you have to create your own products, for example, or you have to totally destroy the previous one, which in growth theory we call creative destruction.
Great points.
Yes.
And we will take a short break. And when we come back, We will find out on who really controls your money. And we're back on who really controls your money. Interesting note. Dato Praba, can we just add on to that?
Okay, so has the government done enough?
Yes, have they done enough?
I think we have a supportive government. The ideas have always been there. And if you look at the likes of Cyberjaya and innovation, I'm just using technology, and even creating free trade zones during the manufacturing era, Malaysia has always had the right ideas. The execution has always been a challenge for Malaysia, and protecting the interests of its own people. And understanding that aggregating talents that are available within Malaysia and addressing all levels of society, ensuring that this ecosystem that we are after isn't pulling us back down the food chain, right? RTM has shut down its global delivery center after 7 years in Cyberjaya.
The one in Cyberjaya?
The one in Cyberjaya, the big one, that's gone. So that big one's gone, and can you imagine all that talent resource pool which I'm competing to get, and guess what? Now they're applying in, but we should have got them first cut, because a multinational brand still sells in wonderful colonized Malaysia. Now, once you get away from that trap and you believe you're like a Swiss country, you have a small population, or even the Dutch, just look at them, 15 million people punch above their weight class. We are 30 million. Why are we stuck in this dilemma?
The mindset, the conditioning.
It's racial issues, the discrimination we're having. We haven't addressed those fundamental core issues. The best of us, and ensuring, and it's not just, if I may, it's not just one race against another. It's not against the Burmese, against the Chinese. It's not 5% of the Chinese holding 90% of the economy in Indonesia. These
Nothing to do with that.
No, these are there. Human beings will find racial ground. This is a human inherent problem, right? We're both Indians. You're probably Punjabi, and I mean, if you go to India, you're going to subdivide that too. So the world is full of these divisions. But the core of it is, if we don't address these core issues, that what's going on in the city, what's going on in the urban. So I think there's a recognition for urban growth. But are we addressing capabilities, whether they are Sabahans, whether they are Sarawakians, whether they are downtrodden of any race? Are we getting the best of us out there? As soon as we get this, then you will move very much faster. We have missed this. Now we've got an opportunity to correct it, but it'll come back to the politicians, somewhat, and the decision makers who lead agencies that want to make a difference. Now, it should not ever be racially biased. That's the first cut. If you want innovation, you want capabilities, we have an inherent structural problem, right? You can't have 95% of your workforce of a certain race in the government sector and X amount of your workforce in the private sector. How are you going to create innovation when everyone's working on little and I'm back to this, right? You can't get one race doing one thing and another race doing another thing.
There's a very big imbalance there.
So therein lies the fundamental issues that need to be addressed. And we can make baby steps, but we need to address the elephant in the room. It's not going away.
Okay.
That's an economic problem that has resulted from political social issues.
Those are very interesting points. Moving on to another interesting one that I've always wondered is that we pretty much started off with the same countries, with similar countries like Taiwan, Korea, and China. And yet we are still here and they have moved so much further. Dr. Andrew, why do you think we are still here?
I think based on, let's say, my understanding, which is much more on the industries, or the industrialization process of Malaysia. Like we have discussed many of these earlier, the lack of technology, the lack of homegrown knowledge, or products. I think why we are still here is one, like we mentioned just now, we do not have our specific niche, or we did not create our own supply chain. Our focus on industry for all these years has always been E&E, M&E, aerospace, medical, and chemical. No problem with that, okay? It is good, because those are sort of our comparative advantage in terms of export. But have we looked beyond all these five, into areas like, for example, let's say SMEs in Malaysia, our largest exports, one of the top 10 is furniture. Have you even considered creating an IKEA of Malaysia or something like that? Having, let's say, furniture industry as our driver, because a lot of value, a lot of all these inputs can actually be found in Malaysia.
Yes.
Okay, we have we have logs, and we have designers, we have craftsperson. why don't we actually look into industries that we ourselves have, let's say, comparative advantage to begin with, rather than keep on thinking about,
rather than just thinking about that issue, let's see what we can actually do about
let's see who should we invite in, and how do we actually, so one thing is, have we actually harnessed that part of our economy? And SME also huge in terms of exports of food and beverage as well.
Right.
So that can also be one of our niche area that we can look into. And also when it comes to digital economy, for example, creative content, games and animation. Malaysia is part of the value chain as well. And we have, talented illustrators. I'm sure we have a lot of storytellers in Malaysia as well.
We do.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is yes, we can continue with the 5 industries that we always focus on, which what we call the picking of all these winners. But, is there another focus? That is my question. So perhaps, the value capture that we have, is different from all the countries that you have explained just now. China, and for example, China, their domestic value added, is increasing, meaning that they are importing lesser of inputs. They can actually create their own because they have that capacity to do so. So that makes the value chain actually much shorter, and that is where they capture more value in terms of their exports. So for Malaysia to do that, one is we have to find a way to actually also, harness our own comparative advantage that we have within the country.
Okay. Dato Praba, I think I read this. I think Chile also kind of made it out of the middle income trap. They were one of the quite recent countries to come out.
I think they're one of the better countries in South America for sure in that regards. But South America have a lot of other issues, inherent issues, which are always present in poorer and developing countries. Malaysia, given its GDP today, we should not be having as many structural issues, which I've addressed just now. But I think on that note, which whether it's unlike what Associate Prof said about the furniture, and I can attest that we've got to find our niche. So I'm using digital, as you're aware, is across all industries, attempting to find our niche, but also believing in local consumption. It's ridiculous if you are focusing an industry into an industry which you want the nation to build on, but you're not supporting the local players therein, you will struggle. It's ridiculous. So he talked about China just now being its own consumer, which makes sense because as you get large enough, India and China don't need the rest of the world. As it just needs a tipping point. Indira Gandhi tried that in India years ago. It was not very successful, but today it might work because they have internal
revisit it.
Because you've got 1-point-something billion people providing support. And now a nation needs to be Thailand survives a lot despite all the funny thing that goes on because it's an SME-led country. To a fair extent, so does Australia. So they're not very dissimilar.
Yes.
Now, SMEs actually bring a lot of life because you're not dependent on one particular segment or industry. If you're dependent on petroleum or mining, like in Western Australia, they struggled when China stopped importing. So the whole nation did nothing different. They worked hard, productive, but they just boom, one nation. So they needed to know how to mitigate. So a country has to have the ability to kind of strategize beyond short-term 3-year views, 5-year views. We've got to find our niche. We're a small country of 30 million people. A small town in China or India will provide graduates, top-notch graduates, that will have a lot of our graduates for breakfast, and they're hungry, determined, and they want to get business done. How are we going to compete in a country that's kind of caught up in, middle income problem, right? There's enough food, enough to eat. What's going to drive me to go up to the next level? And I think herein comes where the leadership has to go beyond. And I think as the political situation in Malaysia stabilizes or changes, you will see that. I keep going back to that because I think that's at the core of the leadership. But at what society in the country can do is we can create innovative thinkers. Furniture, just so you're aware, Malaysian furniture in Australia is very well received. Chinese furniture is normally a notch below. Well, after European furniture, Malaysian furniture today in Australia is well received. It's considered decent quality. Right. Do we believe that here?
Okay, can I interject?
Andrew, I know you have points to add. Okay. Let's take a short break and we will come back to you.
Okay, sure.
Okay, please stay with us on Who Controls Your Money. we're back in conversation on who controls your money. Dr. Andrew, I know you had some points to add. Go on.
No, it's just in relation to what Dato has mentioned just now about our furniture. Yeah, it is highly valued, one, and the question is like, can we actually automate or create?
Go on a bigger level.
Go on a bigger level, yes. For furniture, maybe perhaps we use our. I mean, it's all about technology now. Can I say something about Chile also?
Please carry on.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, Chile is. I don't think it's a very relatable comparison with Malaysia because one is Chile has very limited in terms of product sophistication, and they are mostly resource-based exports. Copper, especially copper. Okay, especially copper.
Raw materials.
Yes. Copper,
just copper.
Yeah, just copper. So they have a very limited product sort of exports compared to what Malaysia has. The only lesson that we can learn from Chile, okay, not only lesson, I think the good lesson is prudent macroeconomic, policies by the government. So I think Chile is a anomaly. A better example that we can actually relate to is actually Korea or Taiwan.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is just what I want to add.
Associate Prof attempted to, and he rightfully corrected that Chile, it's not the right example to set. For Latin America, it's one of their nice stories. Australia has natural resources, so it's really unfair to compare Australia.
Okay.
But it had the average Australian. Now we need to figure out productivity, right?
Yes.
And how it's calculated. Who are we up against, and where's our productivity levels, right? So I think our productivity levels, by and large, by just employing locals and employing Indians and honkies and Australians, and I've employed all of them in different countries. And I can tell you there are challenges in each one of them, but generally our productivity rates, depending on which segment again, if you're in the services segment, it's like that. It's not. Now, I've seen people even define Malaysia as one of the laziest countries in the world, believe it or not. I've actually seen a YouTube article on that. Is it true? The answer is no. I've been around. You can't compare our work rates to Dubai or Brunei. It's so unfair to put us behind these guys, and we're nowhere near that. Now, depending on the segment you're after,
right,
the justification of bringing productive resources from hungrier countries are at play. Now, that creates a palm oil industry or agricultural industry, which is heavily dependent on labor. It's not getting us anywhere, nor employing local capabilities, right? So why would people like yourselves or young people leave the country? There are many factors. One of it, clear, easy example, the exchange rates, right? But more importantly, in fact, is the comfort that they may get treated well from a meritocracy point of view. So you've got those basics that are not being addressed today. And that's one community, right? Or one group. Now, if the communities here don't come together, how do we sell our best? It keeps coming back to that, and I keep bringing it back here, because I don't think you can get the best. And Malaysia is sitting, this is a very crucial point at time in Malaysia. If we miss this, we are stuck in the middle income group, because our neighbors and others but to use an exact comparison, there's no great innovation coming out of Southeast Asia anyway. Singapore is not exactly very innovative themselves, for that matter. They do have efficiencies, and they're in a very good location, and a lot of financial muscle that goes into the state, so different positioning. Korea and Taiwan have their, they both start with manufacturing. Work rates are a factor, but they spin a brand and productivity and an aggregation of capabilities.
Right.
How do you move from, do you really want to move agriculture and manufacturing to services, or do you want to have services, some level of manufacturing and some level of agriculture?
That would be needed.
I think you need a hybrid, and you've got to find your niche in those hybrids.
Okay.
It has to be complementary, the services and the manufacturing sector. Just to add on to that.
When I go into a micro level, a smaller level, I go into the rich keeps getting richer, the poor keeps getting poorer.
No.
How do you see that, Dr. Andrew? Because that is a more relatable scenario for the micro, the little ones, the little players.
I think the distribution policies is actually income distribution policies.
Income distribution policies
is very important. That's why, I think if you look at the World Bank, the latest document, Aiming High, or, we have to harness talent from all groups.
Right.
Yes. So the thing is and also inequality plays a very detrimental role when it comes to the progression of a country. That's why I would like to come back to Chile as well. Chile actually has very, very high income inequality, despite being, like what you say, move away from the middle income trap. So do we want to be, related to countries like that? So yeah, the rich are getting richer and poor are getting poorer. So there is a need for a more equitable, or in terms of distributional policies. And yeah, I think what we can see from the government is actually is to find the income, or find the groups that are being, I wouldn't say discriminated. Like for example, that is not being fully utilized, women, youths, and that is one way to actually close the inequality income, if you want to think of it that way.
So let me add to that. I think the demographics are just one part of it, because you do have inequality of wealth even in countries like Singapore, who seem to have progressed very well from and are now crazy rich Asians, if you like. Yeah. Yes. Why do people want to manufacture in your country? Because you're cheap. So essentially, it will move. So those semiconductor boys that used to be in Malaysia today have all moved to Indonesia, for example, or Philippines. China, which was the world's manufacturing hub, is outsourcing its own manufacturing to other countries, believe it or not. So today, nobody manufactures. So it is, if you have some foresight, you can see it's a short-term gap unless you're doing high-value manufacturing. You can take manufacturing, choose high value. The semiconductor industry has chip makers or wafer fab boys. These are very few and far apart. Malaysia actually tried to get into that game. So what can we do about it? There's a lot we can do. But I think the strategists need to try and look at the country as one and figure out what's going on and you can leapfrog certain things. I was in an event once in Manila, and I recall an economist, and he was Japanese, and he was talking about how Philippines need to get themselves ready for manufacturing, etc. And I was like, wait a minute, guys. Look, we've been there, done that. Why do you want to jump from agriculture? You can jump digital divide. Services, obviously, you can make more money. And BPO functions in Philippines is working for them, right? The English-speaking capability has brought India out of that doldrums for you. And India doesn't have manufacturing. Look what it has today. And all out of purely capabilities that they have, they've harnessed. So same thing in Malaysia now. What is our capability?
What do you think we can do about this now that we know who controls our money and we get a clearer picture of why we are where we are? What can we do about it, in your words, Short?
I still think that the prescriptions are still the same. All right, invest in human capital. That is very important.
Right.
And identify the pockets of opportunities within the economy that we can actually harness with greater value. More homegrown knowledge and homegrown technologies and investment, domestic investment, like you say, DDI. And I think all these are exactly what Dato actually has mentioned, to actually move from our position to break through the middle income to go into high income. All these investments are actually required, in my opinion.
Right.
So don't lose sight. The DDIs are what keeps things sticky, because if local people invest and create stuff that are export driven, that you provide export services, that needs to be supported and brought out, and that ecosystem that comes out of that is sustainable.
Right.
It doesn't leave the country, so you've got money. So essentially, if you build it out from here, you become an net exporter. So don't miss out on that.
And you create your own value and your own brand and your own niche as well.
So ultimately, we've got to find our competitive advantage in each of our segments. What is it? So what do you think, if I asked you, what do you think our nation's competitive advantage is? Just as a layperson, what would you say it is? One competitive advantage.
I would think that our strength lies in the fact that we are diverse. We are diverse. And if you were to ask me, do I consider myself as an ethnicity? I would still go back to I'm a Malaysian. And I have the ability to absorb different cultures. And because I have this, I have a sensitivity. And I'm able to adapt to diverse personalities, nationalities, any situation. And this you can only get when you have this much of diversity in the room.
So that's one.
I'm a melting pot.
Perfect. You've got it. See, you've answered one question which all of us will agree with. That's one competitive advantage. Wonderful melting pot. But we've got another one, right? Thanks to our natural resources of the past, the tin, the rubber that got us ahead of the curve with some of our neighbors, including Korea, right? We have infrastructure that is ahead of most of our neighbors. We are only second to Singapore today. And if you take KL, you might think you're in Singapore, right? So essentially, if you take our infrastructure, don't lose that. And one of my concerns now with Malaysia, when it attracts FDI, and I'm already seeing it in my industry, the excitement of a Chinese national, whether it's a Tencent or Alipay coming and setting up presence here and supporting and taking something away from the local boys isn't exactly something you may want to support. And it's the same thing when all these foreigners coming in is taking away pieces. You know, we're a small nation. You can't expect them to exploit it, number one. Number two, if they're using your infrastructure as a low-cost location, all of a sudden they're soaking up your power, your utilities, your labor force to support their ideas and their innovative thinking to the world. I build and own and manage data centers, right? So we have, that's a sizable capital, right? From that comes the ability to provide an ecosystem of many, but imagine the innovation being from here rather than copycatting one of theirs. It's already there and it's ready for Malaysia.
Yes.
So
that's an amazing point. Thank you.
So this is where we want to go, and this is what I think. Once you get that done, we're on our way.
Just quickly, like internal is very important, but we also must harness the potential of the international market.
Exactly. So think global from day one.
Yes.
Or at least regional. At least regional.
So there you have it, viewers, all the points on who controls your money. Thank you so much once again to Dr. Andrew and Dato Praba for joining us today. And I would like to leave you with who really controls your money. Signing off, Jaswin Daman.